The first sign that something was wrong was not the silence. It was the sound of hundreds of thirsty animals. Just after sunrise, I pulled my truck through the gates of Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center outside Silver Creek, Colorado. Normally, the place came alive at dawn. Horses splashed water from their troughs. Cattle gathered near the automatic drinkers. Employees started their morning routines. That morning, everything felt off. Several horses were pacing nervously along the fence line. A group of cattle stood crowded around an empty trough. One of my workers came jogging toward me with panic written all over his face. "Cole, we have got no water." At first, I thought a pump had failed. Then I checked the system pressure gauges. Nothing. Minutes later, I found the source of the problem. Our main water gate valve had been shut off and secured with a lock. Hanging from it was a laminated notice from Silver Ridge Estates HOA. As I stared at it in disbelief, an older rancher pulled up beside me and quietly said, "Vanessa Whitmore's been telling people your facility will not be here much longer." And suddenly, this was not just a water problem anymore. My name is Cole Maddox, and until that morning, I thought I would seen just about every problem a livestock operation could face. Blizzards, droughts, equipment failures, sick animals, rising feed costs. What I never expected was a battle with a homeowners association. My family had owned land in Silver Creek, Colorado for generations. When my father passed away 15 years earlier, he left me 40 acres of rolling pasture land on the edge of town. Most people would have sold it to developers and walked away with a check. I could not do that. Instead, I built Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center from the ground up. Over the years, the facility grew into one of the most respected operations in the county. Horse owners trusted us. Local ranchers relied on us. The business supported several employees and their families. For a long time, life was good. Then Silver Ridge Estates started expanding. What had once been open ranchlands slowly turned into rows of expensive homes and manicured lawns. And with every new phase of development came more complaints from the HOA president, Vanessa Whitmore. She hated the dust. She hated the trailers. She hated the livestock. A month before the water shut down, she looked directly at me during a community meeting and said something I could not forget. "Agriculture does not belong here anymore." At the time, I thought it was just another complaint. I had no idea it was a warning. The moment I realized this was not a simple maintenance issue, I went into crisis mode. By 8 o'clock that morning, every employee at Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center had been pulled into emergency operations. We started rationing the water that remained in storage tanks while I called every water hauling company within 50 miles of Silver Creek. The costs were brutal. But watching animals go without water was not an option. By mid-morning, trucks were arriving one after another, filling temporary holding tanks while my staff ran hoses across the property. Horses pushed against fence rails waiting for fresh water. Cattle crowded around every available trough. The entire operation had been thrown into chaos. And the more I thought about that HOA notice hanging from the valve, the angrier I became. I climbed into my truck and headed straight for the Silver Ridge Estates HOA office. The building sat near the entrance of the subdivision, a 2-story stone structure designed to look far more important than it actually was. Luxury SUVs filled the parking lot. Perfect flower beds lined the walkway. Everything about the place screamed control. Inside, a receptionist looked up nervously when I walked through the front doors. "I need to speak with Vanessa Whitmore." She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." Before she could say anything else, a familiar voice echoed from down the hallway. "That is all right. Let him in." Vanessa Whitmore appeared in the doorway of a conference room. She was dressed exactly the way she always was, designer blazer, perfect hair, and the kind of confident smile that seemed more practiced than genuine. She was not surprised to see me. In fact, she looked almost pleased. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "I had a feeling you would stop by. That immediately put me on edge. People do not expect reactions unless they know they have caused one." She led me into the conference room and sat at the head of a long, polished table. Several folders had already been laid out in front of her, almost like she had been preparing for this conversation. I stayed standing. "Why is there an HOA notice hanging from my water valve?" I asked. Vanessa folded her hands together. "The board has concerns regarding your property's impact on the community." That was not my question. "The answer is connected." "No," I said firmly. "It is not." For a moment, her smile faded. Then she pushed a folder across the table. Inside were maps, HOA regulations, printed diagrams, and highlighted pages from various documents. Vanessa tapped one of the maps. Silver Ridge Estates has authority over infrastructure that affects community interests. I stared at the document. That is not what this says. It absolutely is. No. It says the HOA can manage common property owned by the association. Her jaw tightened slightly. The livestock facility affects homeowners. That still does not explain why my water got shut off. She leaned back in her chair. Your operation has generated numerous complaints. I almost laughed. Complaints do not give you authority over a water district valve. For the first time, irritation flashed across her face. People like Vanessa were not used to being challenged. We are trying to protect property values, she said. By shutting off water to livestock? We are enforcing standards. You do not have standards over my property. The room grew quiet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa opened another folder. This one contained photographs, pictures of horse trailers, pictures of cattle pens, pictures of equipment parked on my land. Someone had clearly spent weeks documenting my business. Maybe months. Residents have concerns, she said. Residents bought houses next to a livestock facility that existed long before their subdivision. Communities evolve. So do lawsuits. That wiped the smile off her face. Vanessa sat forward. Are you threatening legal action? I am asking who gave you permission to interfere with a water system you do not own. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, I noticed something interesting. She still had not answered that question. Not once. Instead, she kept redirecting the conversation toward complaints, standards, and community concerns. It felt deliberate. And the more she talked, the more convinced I became that she was hiding something. I picked up one of the highlighted maps. Who owns the valve? She paused. Only for a second. But it was enough. The infrastructure serves the community. That is not what I asked. The distinction is not important. It becomes very important in court. That landed harder than I expected. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed her face. Then it disappeared. The confident HOA president returned. She folded her arms and looked directly at me. Mr. Maddox, fighting the association would be a mistake. I could not help noticing she still had not identified the valve owner. Not once. Instead, she switched to intimidation. That told me everything. What exactly are you threatening? I asked. I am warning you. About what? Vanessa stood and walked toward the conference room window overlooking the subdivision. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. Silver Ridge Estates has significant resources. Attorneys, consultants, experts. She turned to face me. You can spend years fighting us. Then came the sentence that stuck with me for months afterward. The HOA always wins. For a moment, neither of us moved. She clearly expected that statement to intimidate me. Maybe it worked on residents. Maybe it worked on people who depended on HOA approval. But I was not one of them. I owned my land. I paid my taxes. And I knew enough about property rights to recognize when someone was overstepping their authority. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. You made one mistake, Vanessa. Her expression did not change. What is that? If you had left the water alone, I probably would have ignored the rest of this nonsense. I walked toward the door. But now I'm going to find out exactly who authorized this. Behind me, her voice echoed through the room. Be careful, Mr. Maddox. I stopped but did not turn around. Why? Because you may not like what you find. I left the building without another word. Driving back toward the facility, I replayed the entire conversation in my head. Something was not adding up. Vanessa had plenty of accusations, plenty of complaints, plenty of threats, but not a single piece of evidence proving the HOA had authority over that valve. And the harder she worked to avoid that question, the more certain I became that the answer would expose everything. At that point, I still thought I was dealing with an overreaching HOA president. I had no idea I was about to uncover something much bigger. The moment I got back to Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center, I stopped thinking like a rancher and started thinking like an investigator. Vanessa Whitmore had spent nearly an hour talking around a simple question. Who owned the valve? The fact that she refused to answer it told me more than anything she actually said. People with authority usually point to it immediately. People without authority try to distract you. Over the next several days, my entire routine changed. Instead of focusing solely on livestock operations, I split my time between running the facility and digging through records. Every morning started the same way. Water trucks arrived before sunrise. Employees dragged hoses across the property. Storage tanks were monitored constantly. The costs were adding up fast. What should have been a profitable summer was quickly turning into a financial disaster. Clients began asking questions. Some were understanding. Others were not. One horse owner pulled me aside near the training arena. "Cole, are the rumors true?" "What rumors?" "That the county is shutting you down." I stared at him. "No, because that is what people are saying." I immediately knew where those rumors were coming from. Vanessa. She did not need to win legally if she could destroy confidence in the business first. That realization made my investigation even more urgent. The following week, I visited the county records office. I requested every document connected to my property. Property deeds, boundary maps, recorded easements, utility access agreements, anything that might explain what was happening. Hours turned into days as I sorted through paperwork. At first, most of it seemed routine. Then I found something interesting. A utility map showing the water infrastructure serving both my property and portions of the surrounding area. According to the map, the gate valve was not owned by Silver Ridge Estates HOA. It belonged to the Silver Creek Regional Water District. I stared at the document for several seconds. Then I checked it again. And again. Same answer every time. The valve was not HOA property. It was not community property. It was not privately owned by Silver Ridge Estates. It belonged to the water district. That discovery immediately raised a new question. If the HOA did not own the valve, why were they acting like they did? Back at the facility, the situation continued getting worse. The summer heat intensified. Water deliveries became more frequent. Employees worked overtime almost every day. The animals remained healthy, but only because we were spending enormous amounts of money preventing a crisis. Every week without normal water service increased the pressure. One afternoon, I sat in my office reviewing invoices. The numbers were ugly. Thousands of dollars in emergency expenses. Thousands more in lost productivity. I rubbed my forehead and stared out the window toward the horse paddocks. This was not sustainable. Someone knocked on the door. It was my operations manager. More mail from the HOA. I already knew it would not be good news. The stack contained 3 separate violation notices. The first claimed my livestock trailers created excessive traffic. The second alleged fencing violations. The third accused me of operating structures without proper approval. I could not believe what I was reading. Most of the listed violations involved improvements that had existed for years. Some predated the entire subdivision. The notices were not about compliance. They were about pressure. Vanessa was creating as many problems as possible and hoping something would stick. A few days later, things escalated again. One of my employees showed me photos posted in a neighborhood social media group. Residents were discussing my facility. Some claimed it was dangerous. Others suggested it should be removed entirely. Several comments mentioned falling property values. The language sounded strangely familiar, almost identical to Vanessa's talking points. It felt coordinated, like someone was actively shaping public opinion. That is when I realized this conflict was not staying between me and the HOA. It was spreading through the community, and that made it much more dangerous. About 2 weeks after the valve shut down, I received an unexpected phone call. The man introduced himself as Tom Alvarez. At first, the name did not sound familiar. Then he explained. He had served on the Silver Ridge Estates HOA board before Vanessa became president. That got my attention immediately. "What can I do for you?" I asked. There was a brief pause. Then he lowered his voice. "I think we should meet in person." The cautious tone instantly made me curious. We arranged to meet the following evening at a small diner outside town. Tom arrived a few minutes late. He was in his early 60s, dressed casually, and looked like someone who had spent years avoiding unnecessary drama. Unfortunately for him, he seemed to have found it anyway. After ordering coffee, he got straight to the point. "I have been following what is happening." I nodded. "Then you know it is getting ridiculous." "It is worse than that." His expression remained serious. For a moment, he simply stared into his coffee, almost like he was deciding how much to say. Finally, he looked up. Cole, this is not really about water. Those words immediately grabbed my attention. What do you mean? Tom glanced around the diner before answering. Vanessa's been targeting your property for a long time. I figured that much out. No, he said quietly. You have not. The certainty in his voice made my stomach tighten. For weeks, I would assume this was another power-hungry HOA president trying to expand her influence. Tom sounded like he knew something different, something bigger. What are not you telling me? I asked. He hesitated. Then he leaned forward. Before I answer that, let me ask you something. Okay. Has anyone approached you about selling your land recently? The question caught me completely off guard. I thought about it. A few developers had made offers over the years. Nothing unusual. Then I remembered one particularly persistent buyer who kept increasing his offers despite repeated rejections. Maybe, I said carefully. Tom nodded slowly. That is what I thought. My pulse quickened. What does that have to do with the HOA? He looked directly into my eyes. Everything. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The noise of the diner seemed to disappear. I suddenly had the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something much larger than a simple HOA dispute. Something that connected the water shutdown, the violations, the rumors, and the pressure campaign. Tom finally sat back in his chair. I am not ready to tell you everything yet, he said. Why not? Because I need proof first. I was not happy with that answer. But judging by his expression, pushing harder would not help. Before leaving, he handed me a business card. Written on the back was a single sentence. Start looking at development proposals near Silver Ridge Estates. Then he stood and walked out of the diner. I sat there staring at the card long after he was gone. The water crisis was already threatening my business. The HOA was escalating its attacks. The community was turning against me. And now a former board member was suggesting that the entire conflict might be connected to land development. As I drove home that night, one thought kept repeating in my head. If Tom was right, then Vanessa Whitmore did not just want control. She wanted something I owned, and I was beginning to suspect exactly what it was. The morning after my meeting with Tom Alvarez, I spread every document I had collected across the conference table in my office. Property maps, water district records, HOA notices, violation letters, utility diagrams. At first glance, they looked unrelated. But the more I studied them, the more I started seeing a pattern. Every problem seemed to originate from the same source, Vanessa Whitmore, and every action she took pushed toward the same outcome, making life at Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center difficult enough that I might eventually decide to leave. The thought bothered me more than I wanted to admit, because if that was her goal, she was not completely failing. The financial pressure alone was becoming enormous. Emergency water deliveries continued every day. Fuel costs increased. Labor costs increased. Clients were becoming nervous. Even my employees had started asking difficult questions. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but everyone was wondering the same thing. How long could this continue? 3 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one came from an attorney representing Silver Ridge Estates HOA. I sat in my office and read it twice. Then a third time. The letter accused my business of violating community standards and demanded immediate corrective action. It also claimed I could face significant financial penalties if I failed to comply. The language was clearly designed to intimidate. Several sections referenced possible litigation. Others suggested regulatory violations that did not actually exist. By the time I reached the final page, my patience was gone. I tossed the letter onto my desk. The strategy was obvious. Bury me in paperwork. Force me to spend money defending myself. Create enough stress that selling the property eventually seemed easier than fighting. Unfortunately for Vanessa, intimidation only works when people stop pushing back. And I was not stopping. That afternoon, I met with a property attorney named Sarah Collins. She specialized in land use disputes and had dealt with HOA conflicts before. After reviewing the documents, she leaned back in her chair. This is aggressive. That is one word for it. She flipped through the pages again. Do you know what is interesting? What? They make a lot of accusations. I nodded. Exactly. But they provide very little evidence. That matched what I had been seeing from the beginning. Big claims. Very few facts. Sarah tapped the HOA attorney letter. If what you are telling me about the valve ownership is true, they are on dangerous ground. How dangerous. Potentially very. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small surge of optimism. Maybe I was not imagining things. Maybe the HOA really had crossed a line. A few days later, I hired a licensed surveyor to conduct an independent review of the property boundaries and utility infrastructure. The survey took nearly a week. When the final report arrived, I opened it immediately. Within minutes, I found the answer I had been searching for. The gate valve sat entirely on land controlled by the Silver Creek Regional Water District. Not partially, not indirectly, entirely. The HOA had absolutely no ownership interest, no easement rights, no management authority, nothing. I stared at the report for several seconds. Then I called Sarah. "You are going to want to see this." Her response came almost immediately. Oh. This is getting interesting. But while my evidence was getting stronger, Vanessa's attacks were becoming more aggressive. The next phase started online. Residents suddenly began posting complaints about my facility almost daily. Many sounded suspiciously similar. The wording repeated itself. The concerns repeated themselves. The accusations repeated themselves. It felt coordinated, almost scripted. One evening, a longtime client called me. His voice sounded uncomfortable. Cole, I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Are county inspectors investigating the property?" "No, because someone in the neighborhood group said there are major violations." I closed my eyes. Another rumor, another lie, another attempt to create uncertainty. By now, I could practically predict Vanessa's strategy. She was not trying to prove anything. She was trying to create doubt. And doubt spreads faster than facts. The following week brought another surprise. While reviewing HOA records online, I noticed several meeting minutes had disappeared. At first, I assumed it was a technical issue. Then I checked older archives. More records were missing. Entire discussions had vanished. Board meeting notes, committee reports, planning documents, gone. That immediately raised alarms. Organizations do not usually delete records when everything is legitimate. They delete records when they are worried about what is inside them. I downloaded every remaining document I could find before more disappeared. Something told me I might need them later. Then things became even stranger. One Friday evening, after finishing a long day at the facility, I returned home and found a plain manila envelope sitting on my front porch. No return address. No name. Nothing. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I picked it up and carried it inside. The envelope contained photographs. Lots of them. At least 20. My pulse quickened as I spread them across the kitchen table. Most had been taken at night. Several showed the water valve area. Others showed individuals standing near utility equipment. The images were not perfectly clear, but they were clear enough. I immediately recognized one face. An HOA board member. Another photo appeared to show two volunteers frequently seen helping Vanessa during community projects. The timestamps caught my attention next. Every photo had been taken within 48 hours of the water shutdown. I studied each image carefully. One in particular made my stomach tighten. It showed a person crouched near the gate valve carrying what appeared to be a locking device. I could not conclusively identify the individual, but the implication was obvious. Someone connected to the HOA had been near that valve right before service was interrupted, and whoever sent these photographs clearly wanted me to know. I looked through the envelope again. No note. No explanation. No clue regarding the sender. Just evidence. Or at least the beginning of evidence. That night, I barely slept. The photos confirmed what I had been suspecting for weeks. This was not a misunderstanding. It was not an administrative error. And it definitely was not about community standards. Someone had deliberately interfered with infrastructure they did not own. The only remaining question was why. The next morning, I called Tom Alvarez. As soon as he answered, I said, "We need to talk." His voice immediately became serious. "What happened?" "I just received something that changes everything." There was a brief pause. Then he replied with words I would not fully understand until much later. "Cole, if they are already sending you photographs, it means people inside the HOA are starting to panic." I looked down at the images spread across my kitchen table. For weeks, it felt like I was fighting an organization that controlled everything. Now, for the first time, cracks were beginning to appear. And when powerful people start making mistakes, the truth usually is not far behind. The following Monday, I met Tom Alvarez at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of Silver Creek. I brought the envelope, the photographs, the survey report, every piece of evidence I would collected so far. Tom arrived carrying a thick leather folder. The moment he sat down, he noticed the photos spread across the table. His expression immediately darkened. Where did these come from? I was hoping you could tell me. He studied them carefully, photo after photo. Finally, he leaned back. Someone inside the HOA sent these. You sure? He nodded. Most residents would not know where that valve is located. That made sense. The valve sat far enough from the subdivision that only people actively involved in the dispute would know its exact location, which meant the anonymous sender likely had first-hand knowledge of what happened. That realization changed everything. For the first time, I was not chasing rumors. Someone from the inside was trying to help. Tom reached into his folder and pulled out several documents. There is something you need to see. The pages looked like printed emails, meeting notes, development proposals. I immediately recognized one name, Brandon Keller. The same developer who had repeatedly contacted me about buying my property. The same developer whose offers had become increasingly aggressive over the past 2 years. What does Keller have to do with this? I asked. Tom slid another document across the table. Read it. I scanned the page. Halfway through, my stomach tightened. The document outlined a proposed expansion project near Silver Ridge Estates. Additional homes, commercial development, private recreational facilities, new roads, new utility corridors, and directly in the middle of the proposed expansion area sat one major obstacle. My land. My entire 40-acre livestock facility. For several seconds, I simply stared at the map. Then I looked up. This cannot be real. It is real. When was this created? About 18 months ago. 18 months. That meant these discussions had started long before the water dispute. Long before the violations. Long before the rumors. The conflict had not begun with the valve. The valve was merely the latest tactic. The realization hit me like a freight train. Vanessa was not targeting my business because she disliked livestock. She was not doing it because of property values. She was trying to make my property easier to acquire. Everything suddenly fit together. The complaints, the pressure, the legal threats, the water shutdown. Every move pushed toward the same objective. Make staying unbearable. Tom handed me another document. This one contained email correspondence. The messages were not addressed to the entire board, only a small group of people. Vanessa Whitmore's name appeared repeatedly. So did Brandon Keller's. I read silently. Each page made the situation worse. One email discussed long-term compatibility issues involving agricultural land. Another referenced opportunities created by voluntary property transitions. Then I reached a message that made my jaw clench. Vanessa had written, "Continued operational pressure may eventually encourage cooperation." I looked up. Operational pressure? Tom nodded. That is how they referred to actions against your facility. I could not believe what I was reading. The wording was carefully chosen. Professional. Polite. But the meaning was obvious. Pressure the property owner until selling becomes attractive. And apparently, I was the property owner. For the next hour, Tom showed me document after document. Most were not smoking guns by themselves. But together they painted a very clear picture. A campaign. A strategy. A long-term effort designed to remove obstacles to development. And my business happened to be one of those obstacles. By the time we finished, I felt equal parts angry and relieved. Angry because my instincts had been right. Relieved because I finally understood what I was fighting. The mystery was beginning to disappear, and facts were taking its place. A few days later, another breakthrough arrived. My attorney, Sarah Collins, called unexpectedly. "You need to come to my office." Her tone told me this was not routine. I arrived less than 30 minutes later. She closed the door and handed me a packet of documents. "Where did these come from?" I asked. "A public records request." I started reading. Within minutes, my pulse quickened. The documents came directly from the Silver Creek Regional Water District. Inspection logs, ownership records, infrastructure maps, maintenance reports. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The water district owned the valve. Completely. Unquestionably. But that was not the biggest discovery. Sarah pointed to a highlighted section. Read that. I followed her finger. Then I read it again. And again. According to internal records, no request had ever been submitted authorizing a service interruption at my facility. No investigation. No violation. No emergency condition. Nothing. Which meant whoever shut off the valve had acted without approval. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Sarah finally said what we were both thinking. If the district did not authorize this, someone has a very serious problem. The weight of those words hung in the room, because we both knew who that someone might be. That afternoon, we filed a formal complaint with the Silver Creek Regional Water District. Every piece of evidence went with it. Survey reports, photographs, HOA notices, emails, maps, everything. At that point, I was not simply defending my business anymore. I was asking a government agency to investigate potential interference with public infrastructure. And unlike the HOA, the water district had actual authority. The waiting period that followed was brutal. Days passed, then more days. No updates, no decisions, no indication of what was happening behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued acting as though she controlled the situation. Additional violation notices arrived. More rumors circulated. More pressure built. But something felt different now. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was not reacting. I was building a case. And cases take time. Then, late on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number. I answered. "This is Cole Maddox." "Mr. Maddox?" "Yes. My name is Daniel Reyes. I am the manager of the Silver Creek Regional Water District." I immediately sat up straighter. "I have reviewed your complaint." My heart started pounding. "What did you find?" There was a brief pause, enough to justify a formal investigation. For several seconds, I could not speak. After weeks of fighting, someone with real authority was finally paying attention. Daniel continued. "I would like to conduct an on-site inspection." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." The speed surprised me. "So soon?" "Some situations require immediate attention." That sounded promising. Very promising. We discussed logistics for several minutes before ending the call. As soon as I hung up, I called Sarah. Then Tom. Neither could hide their excitement. Because we all understood what this meant. The water district was not dismissing the complaint. They were taking it seriously. Very seriously. Later that evening, Tom called back. "I heard something interesting." "What?" "Vanessa does not know about the inspection." I paused. "You sure?" "Positive." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because that changed everything. For nearly a month, Vanessa had controlled the narrative. She controlled the rumors, the pressure, the information. Now, for the first time, someone outside her influence was stepping into the situation. Someone who cared about facts instead of appearances. As the sun set over the livestock facility that evening, I walked toward the same gate valve that had started this entire conflict. The lock still hung there. The HOA notice remained attached. But it looked different now. Less intimidating. Less powerful. Because I finally understood something important. The truth was not hiding anymore. It was coming. And when Daniel Reyes arrived the next morning, Vanessa Whitmore was about to lose control of the story she had worked so hard to create. By the time Daniel Reyes completed his inspection, word had already begun spreading through Silver Creek. Nobody knew exactly what the water district had found, but everyone knew they were investigating. And that alone was enough to make people nervous, especially inside Silver Ridge Estates. Over the next 2 weeks, rumors exploded across the community. Some residents claimed the HOA was being unfairly targeted. Others believed Vanessa Whitmore had gone too far. The debate dominated neighborhood conversations, coffee shops, restaurants, social media groups. Everywhere people gathered, they talked about the same thing, the water dispute. Then the HOA announced a special community meeting. According to the notice, the purpose was to address ongoing concerns regarding community infrastructure and neighborhood relations. Nobody believed that explanation. Everyone knew what the meeting was really about. Me. Vanessa. And the growing controversy surrounding the water shutdown. The night of the meeting, the Silver Ridge Clubhouse parking lot was overflowing. Cars lined both sides of the road. People stood outside talking in small groups. The atmosphere felt more like a public hearing than an HOA meeting. As I walked toward the entrance, several residents glanced in my direction. Some nodded politely. Others looked uncomfortable. A few avoided eye contact entirely. Months of rumors had divided the community. And tonight, everyone wanted answers. Inside, nearly every seat was occupied. Homeowners packed the room. Additional chairs had been placed along the walls. Even then, people were forced to stand. I spotted Tom Alvarez near the back. Sarah Collins sat several rows away. Both gave me subtle nods. They understood how important this night could become. At precisely 7 of the clock, Vanessa Whitmore stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. As always, she looked perfectly composed, confident, controlled, prepared. If she felt any concern about the Water District investigation, she was not showing it. She adjusted the microphone and smiled. "Thank you all for attending." The room gradually quieted. Vanessa began with a carefully crafted presentation. Slides appeared on a large screen behind her. Charts, graphs, community photographs, neighborhood statistics. Everything looked professional. And that was exactly the point. She wanted authority. She wanted credibility. Most importantly, she wanted control. For nearly 30 minutes, she spoke about protecting property values, maintaining community standards, preserving neighborhood quality. The audience listened attentively. Then she shifted toward my property. Without mentioning me by name initially, she discussed adjacent commercial activities and land use concerns. Soon, everyone understood who she meant. Finally, she addressed the water dispute directly. The HOA has always acted in the best interests of residents. Several people nodded. Others remained silent. Vanessa continued. Unfortunately, misinformation has circulated regarding recent actions taken by the association. Misinformation. I almost laughed. That single word revealed her entire strategy. If facts were inconvenient, simply label them misinformation. Problem solved. At least in theory. She spent another 10 minutes defending the HOA's conduct. Every statement was carefully worded. Every criticism was redirected. Every difficult question was avoided. By the end of her presentation, she had painted herself as a dedicated community leader unfairly attacked by outside interests. Had I not lived through the situation myself, I might have believed her. Then came the audience question period. Several residents asked routine questions: budget concerns, maintenance issues, future projects. Vanessa handled them smoothly. Then someone asked about the Water District investigation. For the first time all evening, she hesitated. Only briefly, but enough for people to notice. "The matter is still under review," she replied. "What did they find?" "We have not received any final conclusions." Technically true, but it was not the whole truth, and she knew it. The discussion continued for another 15 minutes before Sarah stood. The room immediately became quieter. Many residents recognized her. Others knew she represented me. Vanessa's expression tightened. Sarah spoke calmly. "Will the board allow Mr. Maddox an opportunity to respond?" The request hung in the air. Several residents immediately voiced support. A few objected. Most simply waited. Vanessa clearly did not like the idea, but denying it would look terrible, especially in a room full of people already questioning the situation. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Very well." I stood and walked toward the front. The room felt strangely silent. Every eye followed me. For months, people had heard stories about my business. Tonight, many were seeing me speak for the first time. I placed a folder on the podium. Then another. Then a third. The stack immediately caught people's attention. Unlike Vanessa's presentation, I was not bringing opinions. I was bringing documents. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Cole Maddox." A few people nodded. Others remained expressionless. I continued. "For the past several weeks, I have listened to claims regarding my property, my business, and my conduct." I opened the first folder. "Tonight I would like to discuss facts." That single word changed the atmosphere. Facts. Not accusations. Not rumors. Facts. I projected the survey report onto the screen. Property maps appeared behind me. Boundary lines. Infrastructure markers. Recorded easements. The audience studied them carefully. This survey was conducted by a licensed professional. I pointed toward the highlighted area. The gate valve at the center of this dispute does not belong to the HOA. Murmurs immediately spread through the room. I continued. It belongs to the Silver Creek Regional Water District. More whispers. More confusion. Several residents exchanged concerned looks. Vanessa remained motionless, but I could see tension building behind her expression. Next came the ownership records, then utility maps, then district documents. Each piece of evidence reinforced the same conclusion. The HOA did not own the valve. The HOA did not control the valve. The HOA had no authority over the valve. The simplicity of the evidence made it difficult to argue against. Then I discussed the consequences. Emergency water deliveries, financial losses, operational disruptions, animal welfare concerns. For the first time, many residents seemed genuinely surprised, because until that moment, they had only heard one version of the story, Vanessa's version. Then my employees began speaking. One described hauling water before sunrise every day. Another explained the impact on livestock health. A third discussed exhausted staff working overtime for weeks. None sounded angry. They sounded tired. And that honesty carried weight. Far more weight than any speech could. The mood inside the room shifted noticeably. People were not looking at me the way they had when the meeting began. They were looking at Vanessa, questioning her, evaluating her, reconsidering everything they had been told. Then Tom Alvarez stood, and the atmosphere changed completely. Former board members rarely speak against their own organizations. When they do, people pay attention. Tom approached the podium slowly, calmly, confidently. He did not attack anyone. He did not raise his voice. He simply described what he had witnessed during his time on the HOA board. Private discussions, development conversations, growing hostility toward agricultural properties. Several residents looked stunned. Others appeared angry. Vanessa's composure began cracking. For the first time all evening, she interrupted. Those statements are misleading. Tom did not react. They are documented. The room erupted with conversation. Questions came from every direction. Suddenly, Vanessa was not controlling the meeting anymore. The crowd was. And the crowd wanted answers. Then something happened that nobody expected. The clubhouse doors opened. The noise gradually faded. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. A man wearing a water district identification badge walked inside. Daniel Reyes. Behind him were two district officials carrying folders. The effect on the room was immediate. Silence. Complete silence. Even Vanessa looked shocked. She clearly had not expected him. Daniel walked calmly toward the front of the room. The audience parted almost instinctively. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. When he reached the podium, he placed a thick binder on the table. Then he looked across the crowd. Finally, his eyes settled on Vanessa Whitmore. The room remained silent as he adjusted the microphone. Then he delivered a sentence that instantly changed everything. I believe everyone here deserves to know who actually owns that valve. And at that moment, Vanessa's confidence finally began to disappear. The silence inside the clubhouse was unlike anything I had experienced before. A few minutes earlier, the room had been filled with arguments, whispers, and tension. Now, hundreds of people sat motionless, waiting, watching. Daniel Reyes stood behind the podium with a thick binder in front of him. The Silver Creek Regional Water District logo was stamped across the cover. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, the conversation was not being controlled by the HOA. It was not being controlled by rumors. It was not being controlled by Vanessa Whitmore. It was being controlled by evidence. Daniel opened the binder. His expression remained calm and professional. The kind of expression worn by someone who did not care about politics, popularity, or public opinion. Only facts. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. The Silver Creek Regional Water District has completed a preliminary investigation regarding the utility infrastructure dispute involving Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. The room remained completely focused on him. Daniel turned a page. Our investigation included property records, utility ownership documentation, maintenance logs, inspection reports, and interviews with district personnel. He paused briefly. Then came the first bombshell. The gate valve at the center of this dispute is owned exclusively by the Silver Creek Regional Water District. The room erupted. People immediately began talking over one another. Questions flew from every direction. Several residents turned toward Vanessa. Others looked stunned. A board member sitting near the front visibly paled. Daniel waited patiently until the noise settled. Then he continued. No portion of the valve is owned, controlled, managed, or regulated by Silver Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The second statement hit even harder than the first, because it eliminated all ambiguity. No shared authority. No special circumstances. No gray area. The HOA had no authority whatsoever. Across the room, I watched Vanessa grip the edge of her chair. Her confidence was beginning to crack. But Daniel was not finished. Not even close. He opened another section of the binder. Additionally, our review found no record of any authorized request to suspend water service to Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center. Another wave of reactions swept through the crowd. People exchanged confused looks. Others shook their heads. Several residents began asking questions simultaneously. Again, Daniel waited. Then he continued. No violation was filed with the water district. He turned another page. No emergency condition was reported. Another page. No maintenance shutdown was scheduled. Another. No district employee approved interruption of service. The room became quiet again. A different kind of quiet. The kind that happens when people realize the situation is much worse than they originally thought. Vanessa suddenly stood. I think we are jumping to conclusions. Her voice sounded sharper than before. Less confident. More defensive. Daniel calmly looked in her direction. I am not presenting conclusions, Miss Whitmore. He lifted a document. I am presenting findings. A ripple moved through the audience. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in her tenure as HOA president, she had lost control of the room. Daniel turned toward the audience. During our investigation, we also reviewed evidence provided by Mr. Maddox. He nodded toward me. The giant screen behind him changed. A photograph appeared. Then another. Then another. The same photographs that had arrived anonymously at my home. Gasps echoed throughout the clubhouse. Several residents immediately recognized individuals shown in the images. One photo displayed people standing near the valve after dark. Another showed individuals carrying equipment. A third showed someone attaching what appeared to be a locking mechanism. The audience reaction intensified. Questions erupted everywhere. Vanessa's face lost color. She clearly had not expected those photos to become public. Daniel allowed the images to remain visible. Then he spoke again. While the investigation remains ongoing, these photographs raised concerns significant enough to justify further review. A man near the front stood. Are you saying HOA members shut off the water? Daniel chose his words carefully. I am saying individuals associated with the HOA were present near water district infrastructure during a period directly connected to the interruption. The answer was cautious, professional, but everyone understood the implication. The room exploded into conversation. Several residents began confronting board members directly. Others demanded explanations. For months, Vanessa had controlled the narrative. Now it was collapsing in real time. Then Daniel delivered another blow. At this time, I would also like to call forward Mr. Robert Hensley. A man seated near the side wall slowly stood. I recognized him immediately. One of the senior water district field supervisors. Daniel gestured toward the podium. Robert approached, raised his hand, and provided a formal statement. His testimony was devastating. He confirmed that district personnel had never authorized any HOA representative to access the valve. Never. He confirmed no emergency existed, no operational issue existed, no legal authority existed. Most importantly, he confirmed district staff had previously informed HOA representatives that the valve belonged exclusively to the water district. That statement changed everything, because it destroyed the possibility of misunderstanding. This was not confusion. This was not ignorance. This was not a mistake. Someone had already been told the truth. The audience immediately understood the significance. So did Vanessa. For the first time all evening, genuine panic appeared on her face. Then Daniel introduced the next witness, the licensed surveyor who had conducted my boundary review. He presented maps, coordinates, property markers. Every measurement supported the same conclusion. The valve stood entirely on water district-controlled property, not near HOA property. not partially within HOA property, entirely outside HOA jurisdiction. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Then Tom Alvarez stepped forward. And that is when the situation truly exploded. Tom carried a thick folder. The same folder he had shown me weeks earlier. He calmly placed it on the table. Then he began describing private conversations that occurred during his time on the board. Development discussions, expansion plans, land acquisition strategies. Several board members immediately looked uncomfortable. Tom continued. Then came the name. Brandon Keller. The room reacted instantly. Many residents knew who he was. One of the largest developers in the region. Tom projected development maps onto the screen. Gasps echoed across the room. The proposed expansion surrounded my property from multiple directions. There it was. The motive. Visible for everyone to see. For months, people had wondered why the HOA seemed obsessed with my livestock facility. Now they had their answer. Development. Money. Expansion. My property was not the problem. It was the obstacle. Vanessa suddenly stood again. This is absurd. Her voice cracked slightly. These are unrelated issues. Tom did not flinch. Then he projected the emails. The audience leaned forward. Page after page appeared on the screen. Communications involving Vanessa. Communications involving Brandon Keller. Discussions regarding operational pressure. Discussions regarding future land use opportunities. Discussions regarding removing barriers to development. Every new page made the room more hostile. Not toward me. Toward Vanessa. The residents who had defended her earlier now looked betrayed. Several openly demanded answers. Others demanded her resignation immediately. Vanessa attempted to respond, attempted to explain, attempted to redirect blame, but every explanation was contradicted by documents. Every defense was weakened by evidence. Every statement raised more questions. Then Daniel Reyes delivered the final blow, the one that ended everything. He removed a sealed packet from the binder. Our investigators obtained additional correspondence during the course of our review. The room became silent again. Daniel projected the document. An email. Vanessa Whitmore's name appeared at the top. The date preceded the valve shutdown. Several paragraphs later came a sentence that changed the entire case. A sentence that left no room for interpretation. No room for misunderstanding. No room for excuses. The email acknowledged that the valve belonged to the water district, and acknowledged that the HOA lacked authority over it. Weeks before the shutdown occurred, the audience stared at the screen. Many looked genuinely shocked. Others looked furious. The impact was immediate. If Vanessa already knew the HOA lacked authority, every justification she would offered over the previous months collapsed instantly. The room erupted. People stood. Voices filled the clubhouse. Residents demanded accountability. Board members argued among themselves. The entire foundation of Vanessa's leadership crumbled before everyone's eyes. One board member stood and spoke into the microphone. I move for the immediate suspension of HOA President Vanessa Whitmore, pending independent review. The motion received a second almost instantly, then another, and another. Within minutes, multiple board members publicly supported the action. Vanessa looked completely stunned. For years she had controlled the organization. Now the organization was abandoning her. The vote was not even close. The motion passed overwhelmingly. The room erupted again. Some residents applauded. Others simply looked relieved. Vanessa remained frozen in her seat, unable to stop what was happening, unable to control it, unable to change it. The fight she would spent months orchestrating had finally turned against her. But for me, the most important moment came later. Much later. After the meeting ended. After the arguments stopped. After the crowd dispersed. I returned to Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center. The next morning, Water District crews arrived. They removed the unauthorized lock, removed the HOA notice, inspected the infrastructure, and restored normal service. I stood beside the troughs as fresh water flowed through the system for the first time in weeks. The sound felt almost unreal. Horses immediately gathered to drink. Cattle followed. Employees smiled. Some laughed. A few looked emotional. Honestly, so did I. Because after months of pressure, threats, rumors, and uncertainty, the truth had finally won. And Vanessa Whitmore had just lost everything she worked so hard to control. For the first time in nearly 2 months, I woke up without immediately thinking about water. No emergency deliveries. No crisis planning. No phone calls from worried clients. No new HOA notices waiting in my mailbox. Just silence. The good kind. The kind I had not experienced since before this entire ordeal began. As the sun rose over Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center, employees moved through their normal routines. Horses drank from freshly filled troughs. Cattle gathered around automatic water stations. Equipment rolled across the property. Everything looked ordinary. And after everything that had happened, ordinary felt incredible. The days following the community meeting brought a wave of consequences that spread throughout Silver Creek. The HOA board moved quickly, much faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of the meeting, Vanessa Whitmore was officially removed from all leadership responsibilities pending a full investigation. A temporary board took over operations. Emergency legal consultations were scheduled. Independent auditors were hired. Residents demanded answers. Lots of them. For years, most homeowners had trusted the HOA leadership without question. Now they wanted to know what else had been hidden. What else had been manipulated. What else they had not been told. The deeper investigators looked, the worse things became. Additional communications surfaced. Financial records were reviewed. Board decisions were examined. Meeting procedures were scrutinized. While many HOA activities proved completely legitimate, investigators discovered repeated examples of Vanessa operating beyond her authority. Several board members publicly admitted they had relied on her interpretation of regulations without independently verifying the information. That admission damaged trust throughout the community. But it also explained how the situation had escalated so far. Most people were not malicious. They were simply trusting the wrong person. Meanwhile, the Water District continued its own review. Daniel Reyes remained professional throughout the process. He never made public accusations, never exaggerated findings, never tried to influence public opinion. Instead, he focused entirely on facts, and the facts continued pointing in the same direction. The Water District ultimately concluded that unauthorized interference had occurred involving infrastructure outside HOA authority. That finding carried significant weight, especially when combined with the evidence already presented during the community meeting. A few weeks later, settlement discussions began. My attorney, Sarah Collins, handled most of the negotiations. The process took time. There were meetings, phone calls, draft agreements, revisions, more revisions, then more revisions after those revisions. But eventually, an agreement was reached. The HOA formally withdrew every violation notice issued against my property. Every single one. The fines disappeared. The penalties disappeared. The threats disappeared. It was as if months of harassment had never happened. Except, of course, they had, and everyone knew it. The settlement also included compensation for documented financial losses connected to the water disruption. The amount was not enough to erase the stress we would endured. Nothing could do that. But it helped repair the damage. Most importantly, it acknowledged something that mattered deeply to me. We had been wronged. And the organization responsible was finally admitting it. One afternoon, shortly after the settlement became official, I received an unexpected visitor. Daniel Reyes. He stopped by the facility during a routine inspection. We walked together toward the valve that had started everything. The unauthorized lock was long gone. Additional security measures had already been installed. New monitoring equipment protected the infrastructure. Access procedures had been updated. The Water District was not taking chances anymore. Daniel looked at the valve and smiled slightly. Quite a bit of trouble for a piece of metal. I laughed. That is one way to describe it. He shook his head. You would be surprised how often small things reveal big problems. That statement stayed with me. Because he was right. The valve itself was not the real issue. The real issue was abuse of authority. The assumption that nobody would question it. The belief that power mattered more than facts. The valve merely exposed those problems. As summer moved into fall, business gradually recovered. Clients who had left returned. New customers arrived. Several people specifically mentioned the community meeting. They respected the way we handled the situation. They respected the fact that we fought back without resorting to the same tactics used against us. Word traveled surprisingly fast, not just throughout Silver Creek, throughout neighboring counties as well. Our reputation emerged stronger than before. The employees noticed it too. Morale improved. Operations stabilized. The constant tension finally disappeared. One afternoon, while watching a training session in the arena, my operations manager sat beside me. "You know something?" "What?" "We almost did not make it," I nodded. He was not wrong. There had been moments when the financial pressure felt overwhelming. Moments when uncertainty seemed endless. Moments when selling would have been easier. Much easier. But easier is not always better. Sometimes standing your ground matters, especially when what you are defending is worth protecting. The biggest surprise came from the community itself. Many Silver Ridge residents eventually reached out personally. Some apologized for believing rumors. Others admitted they had not understood the full story. Several expressed frustration over how they had been misled. At first, those conversations felt awkward. But over time, something unexpected happened. The divide between the neighborhood and the livestock facility began shrinking. People who had once viewed us as outsiders started seeing us differently. As neighbors. As business owners. As people. That change mattered. Because communities function best when people understand one another instead of assuming the worst. The HOA underwent significant reforms. Transparency requirements were strengthened. Meeting records became more accessible. Oversight procedures improved. Independent reviews were added for major decisions. The organization was not perfect afterward. No organization ever is. But it became healthier, more accountable, more focused on serving residents rather than controlling them. As for Brandon Keller, his development proposal quietly disappeared. Without HOA support, momentum vanished. Regulatory questions increased. Public scrutiny intensified. The project eventually stalled, then faded away entirely. I never heard from him again. And honestly, that was fine with me. Some battles do not require dramatic endings. Sometimes walking away is enough. The greatest personal change happened inside me. Before this experience, I preferred avoiding conflict whenever possible. I focused on my work, my property, my business. If someone complained, I usually ignored it. If someone criticized me, I moved on. But this situation taught me something important. Ignoring problems does not always make them disappear. Sometimes silence encourages them. Sometimes standing up matters. Not because you enjoy conflict, but because allowing abuse to continue creates even bigger problems later. One evening, several months after the settlement, I stood near the western fence line watching the sun set over the property. The Colorado sky glowed orange and gold. Horses grazed peacefully in distant pastures. The facility looked exactly the way my father would have wanted. Strong, productive, alive. I thought about everything that had happened. The shutdown, the threats, the investigation, the meeting, the evidence, the victory. Then I thought about the lesson hidden inside all of it. Power is not determined by titles. It is not determined by positions. And it certainly is not determined by who talks the loudest. Real power comes from truth. From persistence. From refusing to back down when you know you are right. Vanessa Whitmore had spent months trying to convince people she controlled the future of my property. In the end, facts proved otherwise. And standing there beneath the Colorado sunset, listening to water flow normally through a system that never should have been touched in the first place, I finally felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. A year has passed since the day I found that HOA notice hanging from my water valve. A year since I stood beside dry livestock troughs, wondering how a homeowners association had somehow convinced itself it could interfere with infrastructure it did not own. A year since Vanessa Whitmore tried to pressure me into giving up something my family had worked generations to build. And now, standing here at Maddox Livestock Boarding and Training Center, it almost feels like a different lifetime. The facility is thriving again. The horses are healthy. The cattle are healthy. The employees who stood beside me through the worst months of the conflict are still here. In fact, business is stronger than it was before the dispute ever started. Not because of the battle, but because of what the battle revealed. People pay attention to character during difficult times. They notice who tells the truth. They notice who takes responsibility. And they definitely notice who refuses to surrender when things get hard. Every now and then, I still drive past the gate valve that started everything. The Water District upgraded security shortly after the investigation ended. New monitoring systems were installed. Access procedures were tightened. The old unauthorized lock is gone. The HOA notice is gone. The intimidation is gone. All that is left is a properly functioning piece of infrastructure doing exactly what it was always supposed to do. Deliver water. Nothing more. Nothing less. What is funny is that the valve itself was never really the story. The real story was about something much bigger. It was about what happens when people assume authority they do not actually have. It was about what happens when facts are replaced by rumors. And it was about what happens when ordinary people decide they are no longer willing to be pushed around. If there is one thing this experience taught me, it is that documentation matters. Keep records. Save emails. Take photographs. Ask questions. Verify claims. The truth often exists long before anyone is willing to admit it. The challenge is finding it. The second lesson is even more important. Never assume someone is right simply because they hold a title. A board president can be wrong. A manager can be wrong. An organization can be wrong. Authority deserves respect, but authority should never be accepted blindly. The third lesson is one my father taught me years ago. Land is not just property. It is responsibility. It is history. It is sacrifice. People see acreage and fences. Owners see memories. Effort. Years of work. That is why some things are worth defending. Not because they are valuable, but because they are meaningful. When I look across this property today, I do not think about the legal fight anymore. I do not think about the threats. I do not think about the endless meetings. Instead, I think about the people who helped uncover the truth. Tom Alvarez, Sarah Collins, Daniel Reyes, my employees, my clients, and even the residents who eventually chose facts over convenience. Without them, the outcome might have been very different. The good news is that Silver Creek learned something from the experience too. The community is stronger now. The HOA is more accountable. People ask better questions. Transparency matters more than it used to. And that is a victory that extends far beyond my property line. So before I end this story, I would like to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that overstepped its authority? Have you ever faced a property dispute where someone assumed they had rights they did not actually possess? What would you have done if you discovered someone had shut off water to your business or property? Share your experience in the comments below. I read more of them than you might think. And if you enjoyed this story and want more HOA battles, property rights disputes, and real-world justice stories where the truth eventually comes out, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Because trust me, the battle over a water valve was only the beginning, and the next HOA nightmare might be even crazier.